It has been said that in Twilight Struggle, you need to know the cards well in order to play well. Well, we're going to take you through every card one by one, and we're going to help you become a master at Twilight Struggle. This is Legendary Tactics. The Arab-Israeli War card is a sometimes powerful, sometimes inconsequential event card that must nonetheless be reckoned with by an American player in the early war. With the power to flip any US influence to Soviet influence, it can discourage early play into Israel, which is the Middle East's most stable battleground. Let's take a closer look at how this card can and should be played. Taking a quick look at the event, we basically have a die roll which is at best 50-50, but with some potentially serious consequences. If the USSR rolls a modified die roll of 4 to 6, they gain 2 victory points and replace all US influence in Israel with Soviet influence. And either way, they get 2 military ops for the track. The die roll is modified by subtracting 1 from the roll for each US-controlled country adjacent to Israel and for US control of Israel itself. This card is ideally used as a turn 1 headline, which can then be followed up with the usual coup of Iran in the first action round. At that point, the USSR has a good chance of eliminating US influence entirely from the Middle East. Even if it doesn't succeed, this card doesn't leave play, so it remains a threat throughout the game until the Camp David Accords event is played. Because the US is going to try to affect the die roll by controlling Israel's neighbors, you may want to take control of those countries first so you can keep the threat of the Arab-Israeli war hanging over the US player's head. This means that the US player will hesitate to control Israel, especially with the Suez Crisis event card also out there. Israel is valuable not only because of its high stability, but in many games it is the last line of defense for the US in the Middle East, and it also happens to be the only Middle Eastern country that is not affected by the Muslim Revolutions card. If Israel is surrounded by a couple of US-controlled countries and your odds of winning are highly reduced, it's likely best to just use this card for the ops. Early on, you are going to want to defend against this card primarily by placing influence into Lebanon, Jordan, or even Egypt for control. This improves your chances of hanging on to Israel, and also makes it harder to be completely dislodged from the Middle East, which is a real risk for the US player in this game. Because of the high stability of Israel, it's unlikely that either side will have the ops to spare to control it early on in the game. That is a good thing for the US player, because even if you lose, it would generally only flip 1 influence. That said, you want to win the Arab-Israeli war instead of lose it. This is usually done by taking the ops first and placing 2 influence in a neighboring country or 2, and then letting the event happen with reduced odds for the USSR to win. Lebanon is useful because it's cheap to control, but it can also be a reasonably attractive coup target for the USSR, who may be interested in hurting your chances with the Arab-Israeli war card and also in gaining domination in the Middle East. Lebanon is vulnerable to the Marine barracks bombing event in the late war, but the Middle East might be dominated by the USSR by then anyway. Jordan is better in some ways because it is a 2-stability country and is therefore harder to coup successfully. If you can spare the ops, it is usually worth the investment. It is also a pathway to the battleground state of Saudi Arabia. One of the countries that is most tempting to play into is Egypt, as it is a battleground state. However, the event card Nasser makes this a riskier proposition, as you may lose influence and control of the country as a result of that event. One of the main reasons Egypt remains a solid choice, though, is because even after the Nasser event, you still have a pathway into the battleground country of Libya. At the same time, because of the risk of a coup, placing influence in Egypt to offset the Arab-Israeli war card would best be done at DEFCON 2. The main reason why the US player would want to play influence into Israel's neighboring countries is not only to modify the die roll for the Arab-Israeli war card, but also, if the war is lost, influence placed in neighboring countries would allow the US to re-access Israel and to again compete for control of that important country. Also, as a side note, it's also important to pay attention to the connecting lines that are sometimes a bit hard to see on the Twilight Struggle board. For instance, Israel is not connected to Iraq. That is one of those things in the Middle East that you need to pay attention to. Also, Jordan is not connected to Egypt and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that the lines connect the countries so that you don't make a mistake or make plans based on a false assumption. So for the USSR, with the potential to knock the US out of the Middle East entirely, the Arab-Israeli war card is potentially a very powerful event. However, if Israel has been shored up and its neighbors have been controlled, then the card is best taken for ops. For the US player, the Arab-Israeli war card is a bit of a pain in the neck, but ultimately is mitigatable through the use of influence in the surrounding countries and eventually in Israel itself. Losing the Arab-Israeli war early on does not have huge consequences, and Israel remains up for grabs as one of the best countries to control in the Middle East. This has been our analysis of the Arab-Israeli war card in Twilight Struggle. If you found value in this video, please like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching. This is NATO with Legendary Tactics. We'll see you next time.